The night is a living thing. It breathes through every seam in the timber, slips under the door, and settles on your skin like a thin, clever animal searching for a way inside. You wake to the sound of wood contracting, tiny clicks and sighs from the walls, and for a slow moment you do not move. You count your breaths as white clouds pooling above your mouth. Cold is not empty here, it has weight. It presses the straw mattress flatter, turns your fingers wooden, asks you politely at first, and then with a steady insistence to get up and tend the fire before the coals forget they were ever warm. You pull the blanket back as if peeling bark from a tree. Every inch in the air steals something from you. Heat from the wrists, nimbleness from the knees. The small room is mostly shadow and outline. The curve of the clay pot near the hearth, the ribs of the rafters, the low beam you always promise not to hit again. Your wife is a bundled shape of furs and wool. The youngest has crawled across the hay to sleep against her hip, and another child lies on a goatskin by the wall, his face turned toward the last whisper of ember glow. You listen for the hiss of snow outside and hear it, faint as a sleeper's breath. The weather has not gone, it is merely crouched. You kneel to the hearth, which is a patient companion. A good fire accepts you, even when you are clumsy, even when your hands are slow, and the kindling is damp at the edges. You prod the ash, find a pocket of orange living under the grey, and feed it slivers of birch, peeled from a split log. Birch is a generous friend in winter. It catches quickly and does not sulk. The fibres take the spark, as if remembering an agreement made in better months. You blow once, twice, the way your father taught you to lift the ember, not scatter it, and the flame rises with a small, polite bow, then stands. Heat remakes you in careful layers. First the fingertips, prickling awake, then the narrow bridges of the knuckles, then a slow river through the forearms. The light creeps across the room, and the walls answer back in their language of resin and ring. Thick logs darken to a soft shine where the sap warms. Between them, the seams of moss and clay look almost green in the glow, as if the forest has been folded into the house and told to keep quiet until morning. In the dimness you can see what keeps you alive and what could kill you, and they are often the same thing. The door is stout, but it swells when snow drinks the air, and can wedge against the jamb. The roof is heavy with old rafter wisdom and new thatch, yet a thaw followed by a sudden freeze can snap it awake in the night, with a crack like a shouted word. The single window is no luxury. It is a bargain with daylight. The horn pane keeps the worst wind out, but frost still blossoms there in delicate ferns, a winter garden you cannot harvest. You dress the way a tree grows, layer by layer. Linen grown uneven by wear, then wool that catches your heat and keeps it home, then leather stitched in a hurry last autumn when the first frost arrived too soon. Cloth is a currency you spend slowly. A second pair of socks would be a feast. You lace the boots at the hearth so your fingers don't fumble. Your breath rises and fades in the warmer air, and you are almost yourself. The house speaks in many voices when the fire wakes. There is the small pop of sap surrendering. There is the hush of smoke gathering its thoughts under the roof hole before slipping out into the dark. There is a soft ripple from the straw mattress when your wife shifts and tightens the furs around the child without quite waking. The cat, which is nobody's and everyone's, materializes near the threshold to ask the dawn which side it plans to enter from. Even the iron hook above the hearth seems to ease its shoulders, as if relieved it won't be asked to hold a cold pot against a cold dawn. You test the jamb with a palm. The door is obedient tonight. You lift the latch and set it back without opening, the way a man checks his own pulse. Outside, the wind has drawn a line along the bottom of the door with fine snow, a pale seam that remembers every footstep of yesterday and dares you to make new ones. You will, but not yet. It is a poor bargain to give heat back to the yard too early. There is a small job for the early hour. You step to the north wall and run your fingers along the seam you patched 2 weeks ago, where the moss settled and the clay dried with an honest crack. Not wide enough to name, but wide enough for cold to learn it. You learned long ago that the house is not a finished thing. It is a verb. It houses. It is always doing or undoing. and you with it. You work a pinch of fresh clay, kept in a damp cloth by the hearth for such emergencies, into the seam, press the moss back down, and smooth it with the heel of your hand. Your hands are maps of this place. Every ridge of your palm knows a groove in the timber. Every scar has a matching notch somewhere in the room. When the fire steadies, you hang the small kettle in its usual place. The water will start as a mutter, and then learn to speak. Porridge will be a virtue again, as it is most mornings until the geese return. You think of the woodpile, count it without looking. There is a math to winter that does not live in books. It lives in rows of split logs, in the way the stack leans toward the door, so that the shortest walk carries the heaviest truth, in the way you turn each piece to see if it still wears the wet shine of the living tree. Green wood is a thief. It steals heat to dry itself. You save the dry for mornings like this, when the house begins at the edges and must be convinced to meet itself in the middle. The child near the wall stirs and opens one eye, the way children do when they dream you from far away to tell you they still exist. You lay a hand on his hair and it is warm. He makes the small sound of contentment that is older than speech, and you hope the sound lives long enough to be heard by his children. Hope is a form of heat. You do not waste it. You set a wedge on the chopping block near the door. There will be time, when the pale edge of morning scrapes open the horizon, to bring in 2 more armloads. 2 is the right number. More will melt into comfort and make you careless. Less will ask you to choose between a longer fire and a later one. The kettle begins to find its voice. The smell of damp iron, of wood thinking about flame, of ash that has told this story before. In the corner is the tool you made for nights like this, a narrow board with a handle and a row of notches. It looks like a child's game, but it is a memory machine. Each notch is a day, marked after the last ember is tucked and the door is barred. Not to count down winter refuses to be counted, but to remember that each day was met. You will cut a notch tonight if the wind allows. The board is almost full. The thought fills you with a quiet pride that hides easily in the dark. Take a slow breath, and let your shoulders drop. Let the cold stay at the edges where it belongs, while the room learns to glow again. There is more to this story than frost and fear stay with it. By daylight, the house shows its mind. In the fire's amber reach, the walls cease to be a brown blur and become a ledger, lines of grain, seams of moss, the quiet arithmetic of survival, written in cellulose and clay. A log wall looks simple from the road. Close your hand against it, and you feel a city. Capillaries of resin dried, the color of old honey. Cold stored, like a stubborn idea. Knots that remember wind. The wall is not a picture, it is a device. You start at the corner, where intelligence lives. Corners are arguments between logs, settled by the way their ends are notched and married. Your grandfather cut saddle notches that cup the log below, like 2 palms holding water. His brother swore by V-notches cleaner shed of rain, tighter in long winters. Either way, the principle is the same. Gravity is invited to help. Water is shown the door. Tight corners make fewer promises to the wind. Between logs is the bookbinding. Moss, clay, and sometimes hair or animal fiber, whatever the year surrendered in mercy. You pull a little of the chinking free, roll it between finger and thumb, and it gives the old answer: spring of moss, grit of sand, faint metallic scent where some blood was mixed to bind the clay. Blood is a serious glue. The elders say it keeps the seam from crumbling when the freeze and thaw quarrel week after week. Whether that is truth or respect for the dead, you cannot say, but the seam holds. A good wall is built from the forest in a way that honors the original sentences. You can read how the tree grew. Fast years are wide and soft. Hard drought years are narrow and stubborn as old men. Put the drought years to the sky, and the soft years toward the room, and the inner face polishes with a touch, while the outer face shrugs sleet and insult. You choose logs with heartwood straight and knots asleep. Green wood will betray you. It shrinks in its own time, which is never yours. Seasoned wood, though harder to cut, meets winter as an equal. This is why the men who hurry in autumn build houses that sigh all winter and pull themselves apart by Candlemas. When the village raises a wall, they bring their tools like a choir brings voices, wedges, froes, adzes, that shine only where work has asked them to. No iron is polished for pride. It is bright where wood resisted and dulled where it obeyed. The bond between log and log is won by patience. You lay a course, then listen. You can hear the places where air calculates an invasion. The old women are best at this. They sit just inside the corner, eyes closed, and tell you where the house is losing words. Their knuckles know drafts faster than a candle does. The men call it magic. It is not. It is apprenticeship to winter. There is ceremony in the smoke test, practiced at first snow, when the air outside is honest. Shut the door, tamp the roof hole to a slit, and coax the hearth to a low, steady ghost. Smoke is a tattler. It fingers the weak points, bleaching them grey. It curls along the seam, where moss thinned, presses itself into a hairline gap where the clay dried too quickly. You follow it with reed and paste, making the house forget where it was vulnerable. Later, you open the roof hole, let the smoke climb clean, and the room smells like a saved life that nobody will sing about. Walls are not merely to block cold, they are to manage it. Cold behaves like water poured by a clumsy god. It pools in hollows, slides across floors, and serves gravity with blind devotion. This is why the house does not sit at the bottom of the slope, where damp crawls into bones and frost stays after the sun has done all it can. Nor does it crown the hill, where wind sharpens its knives. A good place is on the middle shoulder, where a southern face can nibble sun on short days, and a northern wall keeps its stern back against the hill's mild embrace. The old ones call this the comfort line, and they find it with calves and eyes, not with instruments. Stand there at dusk and feel where your breath is least offended. That is the place. Do not argue. The north wall must be a sermon on discipline. Little window, if any. Thicker logs, closer seam. Here the winter won't try to bargain. It will storm your keep. You stack firewood along that wall outside, not for looks but for physics. It breaks the wind and lends its cold mass to take the blow first. Then, when you bring the same wood inside one armful at a time, its loyalty changes sides, and it gives that cold back to the fire. The village's jokes about your north face manners are never quite jokes. A sloppy north wall is the sin you confess by spring, if you live to confess it. Once the wall is built, it continues to be made. The house houses, a verb that demands continuance. You monitor seams like a shepherd, counts sheep, not every moment, but always in memory. After storm days, children run the perimeter with their little hands, rewarded by the praise of finding a whistler, a hair-thin line that sings when the wind is right. They bring the news like true messengers. You kneel with a bowl of paste, press the gap quiet, and tell them they have helped rescue the room. A child likes to be told that a wall can be saved. It tells them other things can be too. There are failures you never forget because other people paid for them. In a year not yet faded, the hob cottage fetched its logs from a stand too near the bog. The wood was heavy and green, the builder kind, tired, unlucky thought the hard freeze would season it right in the wall. Winter is not a cooper, the seams widened by 12th night. Smoke failed the test and returned to the breathing parts of the room, and the air learned to lie warm to the eyes, hungry to the lungs. The small coughs that began in the children turned to winter's older story, and before snowmelt the mother wore a kerchief no longer to keep her hair tidy. The village took note. No one speaks the builder's name with malice, but no one copies his haste. The forest asks for patience or takes interest. Inside, you treat the inner face of the wall as a partner. Hangers and hooks are placed into the thickest growth years. Pegs are driven where the grain can apologize for the hole and close around it. Heavy pots live low, where the wall is strongest and spills are less proud. In deep cold, you lean straw mats against sections that misbehave, not because it solves the physics, nothing solves winter, only bargains with it, but because it softens the draft enough that a child can fall back asleep in the same square of floor. It is a strange mercy that the wall stores stories with the same diligence it stores heat. The roof beam has notches from the day the calf slipped its halter there and made the children squeal. A soot shadow above the hearth marks 3 winters ago, the night you fed the fire with too much pine, and learned the word greedy applies to flames as well as men. Near the door, a hairline stain shows where spring's first melt found an unwise path, and the quick dam you built with a broken spoon turned a little flood into a tale for laughter. These marks are the house's face lines. You read them to remember which mistakes you are permitted to repeat, and which would be ingratitude. Outside, you skin the weather from the wall with care. Snow piled high is friend and threat. A winter blanket when it is still. A pry bar when thaw comes crooked. You bank it by hand, sculpting away the ledges where dripping sun will make ice teeth. You sweep the sill at noon when warmth is a brief ally, so the night won't find a wedge. All of this looks like fussing. It is not. It is conversation with an old teacher who likes you enough to be strict. By mid-morning, the room has warmed into its true size. With warmth, space inflates. The children become brave enough to occupy corners. The cat invents a sun patch from memory and pretends to sleep in it. Your palm, pressed against the seam you mended at dawn, finds it quiet. The wall has remembered its promise for another day, and the house's thinking mind hums around you. Hold, hold, hold. If you're still awake, listen closely. The walls around you once whispered the same lessons. The roof is a sky you can touch. It is also a promise that water, which loves mischief, will be made to mind its manners. When you raise your head in the morning and study the roof from below, you are not merely admiring carpentry. You are reading a weather map nailed into place. Timber first. Rafters are the bones straight if fortune allows, curved if the tree grew honest, and you were clever enough to let its honesty stand. A bowed rafter is not a failure if you seat it with a grin of timber to match. The roof will learn a gentle sway that sheds snow like a shrug. Purlins run across these ribs, a secondary spine, binding the rhythm of the structure, so the load becomes a story told to many listeners rather than shouted into one ear. Joinery is modest. Mortise and tenon where it matters. Pegged with heartwood pins, you split yourself so they swell and hold, even when rain tries to teach them doubt. No metal to ring lightning's bell, no needless iron to tempt damp, just wood in conversation with wood. Above the bones is the skin, and skins work best in layers, the way winter clothes do. First, bark birch if you have it, because birch thinks like a roof, thin, tough, a natural slate that laughs at wet for a time. You lap each sheet with the grain's built-in arrows pointing downward, so water remembers where to go. Over that, thatch, straw cut, before it grew proud seeds, because pride rots, bundled tight, angled, so each stalk acts like a narrow reed gutter. The pitch of the roof is not poetry, it is physics. Too steep and wind will find a sport, too shallow and snow will settle into a second roof that sooner or later wants to be a floor. At the eaves you ask for kindness. Thatch is trimmed and tucked, and the overhang is long enough to throw rain beyond the wall's shoulders. A foolish eave is a wet cradle for rot. A generous one is a year's patience saved. In high winter, when storms teach the roof new weights, you read the sag at the eaves like a shepherd reads weather in a sheep's eye. If it draws down more than a finger's width, you heave your brush broom and climb, not to fight the snow, but to persuade it off in evenly shared avalanches. You work your way from the bottom rows upward, coaxing, never gouging, never tearing the thatch. A roof is like a good mule. It will carry if you don't whip. There is a hole where smoke negotiates its exile. This is the roof's mouth, and must be shaped with discipline. Too wide and warmth leaves like a careless guest. Too tight and soot kneels on the rafters in velvet, and the room coughs its thanks. The rim is hardened by heat and patience, and sometimes by a ring of clay that drinks carbon and withdraws. On weather that smiles thinly, you set a simple hood wooden, pitched like a small house, to lift the exit above swirls that try to push smoke back just to settle a petty score. It is not a chimney to brag about. It is a throat that learned to sing through winter. You know the roof from above as well. On narrow days you climb with a line at your waist and your boots recollecting old bark. The world is tight and near up there, even as you can see all the fields sleeping like loaves under cloth. Thatch under your palms is dry music. You tuck in a stray bundle here, you pin a wavering edge with a hazel rod there. You whisper a promise you can keep, that you will listen for drip, before drip turns into an alphabet the bed understands. More than once in your life, the first syllable of ruin came as a single dark spot in straw, coin-sized and patient. This is why you keep a small ladder hung high, and a basket with tools called by names only your house uses. A curved needle of green wood laced with flax cord to pull thatch tight where a seam remembered the sky. A blunt knife that doesn't bite too far. A pouch of dry moss that swells when water asks it a question. And clay, always clay, the grammar paste of your world. Some winters you let the roof grow wild. You seed the thatch with sedum and low stubborn grasses that take root in the silt of dust the wind offers every year. By midsummer the roof becomes a meadow for bees, and by deep winter the matted roots are a second skin. A living roof promises the work of trimming and the patience of balance, but it pays in silence. Rain darkens it without complaint, and the sun bakes it into a warm lid that remembers your name. You never forget that plants invite creatures. So you set traps for birds who would dig too eagerly, and offer a little straw nearby as fair tribute. Everything bargains, you just want the bargains written plain. Inside, the roof speaks the language of drops. In a night of thaw, you wake to a sound like a lone footstep. You do not wait for the second. You rise with a cloth and the small bowl that lives under the bench for such midnights. You find the drip not by sight, darkness makes all ceilings innocent, but by listening for the microsecond between the water's free fall and the bowl's small acceptance. Then you mark the place with your finger and memory, because dawn will lie to you and show you a stain 2 hands' breadth away. When light comes, you climb and fix the truth. A thatch reed that lost its neighbor, a bark sheet uncoupled where frost invaded politely, a pin that shrank thin as a wintered worm. Floors keep the bargain, the roof begins. The ground is the oldest cold there is, and it rises into bones the way a country's old grief rises into song. You need a floor that doesn't invite that grief to bed. Some make plank floors, raised on sleepers with a crawl space where the house can breathe. That is a rich man's patience, because planks ask for more saw than most villages own. You make the floor from tamped earth and intelligence, layers, like the roof, but upside down. First, stones and crushed shell, if you can trade for it. A drain field that tells wet it has somewhere else to be. Then a spread of sand, because sand likes to stay put and carries water through itself instead of holding it like gossip. Then clay mixed with straw and a handful of fine ash, beaten into submission with wooden tampers until the surface shines as if you ironed the ground. Your wife calls that shine dignity. You call it a floor that will not betray heat to the deeper dark without a fight. On mornings of clean cold, you strew dried rushes. They are a sacrament and a technology. They keep the skin of the floor from drinking spilled broth, and they keep toes from learning the hard edges of January too quickly. When they grow tired of their duty, you rake them, feed them to the animals, or let them die into the midden, and bring in new. The rush mat near the door is thicker, because doors welcome both friends and trouble at the same hour. By the hearth, you nail a strip of old leather. Hot cinders bow to it and lose interest. A trap for damp lives under the south wall. A shallow trench, filled with rounded stones that do not collapse into themselves, with a drain that finds the yard's slight fall. When the thaw begins, and the floor dreams of becoming a pond, this trench remembers its purpose and drinks the dream first. You have learned to trust it with the same affection you give to a quiet neighbor who says little and shovels much. The floor and the roof collude to keep the room a middle place. Heat rises, cold falls. The house teaches them courtesy. On hard nights, you peg a heavy cloth across the rafters to make a false ceiling. The room lowers itself into a warmer self for a few hours. Children sleep on the high bench that rests above the hearth's shoulder, where heat stacks like loaves. Elder bones get the corner where drafts choose the long way around. Each placement is a line of a poem that refuses to rhyme with hunger. You rehearse the maintenance when the sky is kind, because practice learned in calm becomes instinct when the wind forgets its manners. The roof kit is checked. The ladder's pegs are tight. The floor's cracks are read the way you read your mother's face when she was ill, knowing which lines are ordinary age and which ask for soup. You do this not out of fear, but out of gratitude. The house is a companion, not a charm. Companions are tended. By afternoon, a faint drip speaks again from the eaves corner, and then stops, the way a child decides to behave after one last test. You crouch at the threshold and peer along the line where roof becomes day. All is held. Not forever, nothing in winter promises that, but long enough to make porridge, tell a story, and see the small miracle of breath that does not hurt leaving your mouth. Before we go on, stretch a little under your blanket. Imagine the warmth beneath old floors, holding a family through the dark. Morning arrives, shoulder first, leaning into the room before light itself dares the window. The hearth has been nursing a red memory all night. Now it wants purpose. A house is a system that wakes in orders. Fire first, then water, then mouths, then feet. You reach with the poker and find that last red, coax it with dry splinters, cut the thickness of your thumb. Breath becomes bellows, not a rush, a coaxing, and the coal accepts your terms. Flame unrolls like a small banner announcing the republic of today. The ironwork at the hearth is your quiet machinery. A crooked trammel hangs from the beam above, punched with holes at hand's width so the pot can be raised or lowered in steps that matter to porridge and to patience. Hooks for small kettles, a swinging arm to pull a heavy pot out of the fiercest heat, a simple spit that has roasted more roots than meat. None of it is beautiful until it is used. Then it is the kind of beautiful that looks like a good scar. Water has slept in the lidded bucket near the door, thin ice glazing its face. You crack it with the back of the ladle, lift the cold into the iron pot, and hear the friendly complaint as metal meets winter. A pinch of ash goes in lie's shy cousin to settle the taste. Then barley and a smear of fat saved from the last happy day. The neighbours slaughtered a pig. The pot forgets the cold quickly. It remembers its work. Soon it mutters in a register that says the room can move from survival to living. The family wakes in a scattered procession. The youngest is guided by smell alone, blinking toward the orange. The middle child sits up like a soldier, pretending he meant to be this brave all along. The eldest checks the cot where the cat nested, then rolls her eyes at the theft, as if sharing a long joke with the house. Your wife shifts from the warm hollow of the bed to the bench, and tucks her braids into a kerchief already powdered with flour. She does the morning's first accounting without numbers, looks, touches, habits. Hand to the child's forehead. Eyes to the roof seam she worries about. Palm to the jug, where the sourdough starter dreams beside the chimney's heat. Thumb to the onion braid, to test for softness that would betray damp. Breakfast appears out of these small audits. A handful of dried apple into the porridge for the children's patience. A crack of salt for the grown bones. Yesterday's heel of bread is held by the fire until it learns to be kind again. Onion skins go to the pot for colour, and the cat claims the onion's twin as if it were prey. The house smells like a kitchen built from promises. Smoke threaded with sweet, starch threaded with fat, cold threaded with steam, until the cold itself begins to retreat to the corners, like a scold who knows the sermon is over. You say grace that is not a form but a habit, gratitude to wood that turned its back on the forest to be your wall, to grain that let itself be broken, to water that gave up its stillness for heat. Eating is the slowest work you do and the most important. Between spoonfuls the day assigns itself. The eldest will fetch kindling and sweep the rushes. The middle child will knock the snow cap off the north woodpile and count pieces as if counting were a story. The youngest will be entrusted with the egg, only one this week, and a miracle at that, to place in the clay dish near the hearth, where it won't freeze into poetry you cannot eat. Heat is not merely a number here. It is choreography. You move bodies through the morning according to the room's invisible weather. Elder bones keep the chair that backs onto the flue, where the bricks hold last night's language and hand it back a syllable at a time. Children sit on the hearth bench to tie boots, not because it is convenient, but because it is a lesson that warmth should be earned with stillness. Wet mittens are hung on the crossbar, that the smoke polishes the house's drying rack disguised as a beam. Even the dog, if the dog comes today, will learn to sleep where drafts choose the long path. There is a science here, but it doesn't wear spectacles. The pot hangs lower when the porridge needs courage, and higher when it needs patience. The lid is set ajar, just enough to let steam plead its case without letting the heat vote itself out of the room. Ash from last night is raked into the iron pan because a blanket of ash over coals is a bank account of warmth, and because eggs on the days you are kings become saints in ash, set to smoulder beside the fire, until they firm into a comfort that can cure a cold mood. Wood is counted without counting. You learn the grammar of lengths and species. Alder for first light, it doesn't spit insults. Birch for quick cheer, like laughter at the start of a hard task. Oak for long thinking, it holds the room's thesis when the wind chooses debate. Pine only as a warning or a treat, it crackles like gossip and smokes like regret. Each log becomes a sentence in the day's paragraph, placed with attention to where heat should enter and how long the room should recall it. The poker writes and rewrites this paragraph until the draft is right. Your wife knots a cloth and opens the small chest where herbs keep summer's handwriting. A pinch of thyme for the cough that sleeps in the eldest's chest. A crumble of dried nettle for iron. If anyone sneezes twice in the wrong key, she will simmer onion and a scrape of honey and make a poultice that smells like forgiveness. The apothecary is memory. The shelf is an alphabet of jars with no labels because hands have better eyes than paint. In the darkest weeks, she warms a stone at the hearth and swaddles it in linen to slip beneath the children's feet at night. A warmed stone is a small sun you are allowed to touch. Chores understand heat too. Snow is moved early, before it chooses to weigh as much as sorrow. Water is carried before the path becomes a lesson in slipping. The privy is visited when the body is still brave and not yet full of soup. You keep a bucket of sand mixed with ash by the door. It draws the wet from boots and keeps the threshold from becoming a short road to the floor. The broom near the lintel wears down like a good argument, thinner with each reason it sweeps into a pile. Neighbours fit into the hearth's circle without crowding it. A knock at second light might be a woman with a loaf to swap for half a pot of broth, or a boy with cheeks like flags bringing the village's ember from last night's great fire to a house whose luck went out in a hiss. You never send someone away empty. Even if all you have is an ember the size of a fingernail, it is a passport through weather. Some mornings the smith himself slips in, shakes the snow from his beard, and points with a blackened finger at the trammel, promising to punch you 2 new holes after midday if you bring him a branch of good straight hawthorn. Heat buys favours quietly. The hearth decides the pace of speech. Work words are short and placed between breaths. Story words are long and laid out like rugs when the pot settles into its soft drum. Children learn history in fumes, how the long winter before they were born bent the door latch into a hook, how a goose once walked into the house as if invited and laid its opinion by the hearth, how you and your brother were fools one night with resinous pine and saw the smoke roll down from the rafters like a king that had changed his mind and come back to conquer. That story always ends with a cough and a promise. It is worth telling. The rafters still remember. By mid-morning, the day wears its clothes, porridge bowls scoured with a twist of snow, then dried by the hearth so they won't learn the habit of damp. The pot is hung higher, with a handful of legumes and a chopped carrot to think itself toward noon. Bread dough is coaxed into life and tucked near the flue. under a blanket, so the cat won't baptize it with paw prints. You leave the hearth just long enough to bring in 2 armloads of wood. 2 is the rule, and stack them inside, where the bark can warm and the sap can reconsider its loyalties. On the return, you set 1 boot against the sill and stamp the yard out of the tread. The threshold is where outside must learn diplomacy. There are no clocks, but there are schedules. Heat has one. The room is fullest with it just before midday, when the fire's memory and the sun's brief favor overlap. Work that asks for nimble fingers, mending harness, braiding cord, prying a splinter from a thumb before it teaches bitterness, belongs to that hour. Work that only wants the steadiness of a back carrying, sweeping, splitting, a reasonable quota of kindling can be set to the cold's metronome. The hearth measures out this logic without speaking. You could live your whole life under its governance and never name the law it writes. A pause comes without being planned. It is the pause when bodies have eaten and the fire has settled and morning no longer feels like a threat. In that quiet, your wife asks the question that tests the day's mettle without scolding it. She looks at the wood laid by the wall, at the stack outside glimpsed through the horn pane, at the snow the north wind has thrown high against the fence, and then at you. Do we have enough wood for the month? It is not a demand. It is the house asking itself whether it can keep its word. Keep listening. The fire won't last forever, but the stories built around it might.
The hill keeps its own secrets. If you walk its flank with your eyes on the horizon, you will miss the doorway hidden in the fold where wind runs out of opinions. Edgar lives there, under the slope itself, in a house that looks like a mistake until winter begins its examination. Above, the fields were white as if the land has grown old in a single night. Below, a door of dark planks tucked into a shallow cut, a lintel with lichens that have never learned to hurry, and a drift of snow shaped like a sleeping dog. The path to his threshold is not level, it descends a little, enough that the cold, which loves to fall, falls into the earth and does not rise through the door. That small descent is the first sentence of his house. You knock and the knock sounds like a hand on a drum. Earth answers in a low register. Edgar lifts the latch and lets you into a room that is less a room than a held breath. The ceiling is low enough that pride has to lower its head. Timber ribs, rough peeled, are set close. They hold up a lid of turf that in summer grows hair and in winter grows quiet. The walls are earth-pressed until it has opinions clay and silt and a little grit, cut clean with a spade that knew where roots would be. The corners are not corners at all, but gentle rounds that refuse to invite cracks. Everything softens underground. Even hard men's voices arrive shorter than they set out. The warmth is not theatrical. It does not leap, it surrounds. The hearth is a compact box in the middle third of the room, built of brick napped from river clay and a few stones that proved themselves under rain. Smoke climbs into a flue that rises through the turf and bends once to humble the wind before meeting the sky. You stand still and feel a lesson. The air moves because the house taught it to. Fresh air comes in through a wooden tube laid low along the entry, a cold trap that spills its weight near the floor. The fire's pull gives the room a slow draft from ankle to shoulder. You can taste the difference. No smoke cough, no sulk of damp. An underground house breathes with an animal's patience. It inhales where the earth is cool, and exhales where fire tells stories. Edgar's wife, Maud, nods from the bench, a built bed raised from the earth and filled with straw that has never known rain. The bench is warm, not because the room is hot, but because the room is steady. Earth at arm's length has the memory of summer. It does not consider the wind's latest fashion. A pot rests at the edge of the hearth, too small to impress, too constant to betray. What they feed you is not rich, but it doesn't need to be. A slice of carrot tastes like carrot from August, which is a kind of miracle performed without a priest. Your eyes adjust, and the house's purpose sharpens. Shelves carved where the wall curves, slots for tools that don't fall because the wall knows the tool's shape. A hatch at the back where the slope continues downward into a cool chamber. A larder that keeps apples thoughtful and meat honest. The cool carries itself along the clay like a messenger who doesn't tire. Edgar says he can hang a piece of venison 3 days longer than you can in your wall house, and you do not argue. You can feel it in your knuckles, the room's stubborn refusal to climb or drop more than a few degrees from its chosen truth. He pours you broth with the economy of a man who can read a winter by the way the spoon sets down. We burn a third less wood, he says, not as boasting but as a verdict. Maybe half in a hard year. He taps the wall with his knuckle, and it returns a sound like a good barrel. The hill is our wood. He smiles that half smile of a man who has made peace with a joke used against him. You know the village's talk, that dugouts are for people shy of sunlight and bold with thrift, that a proper house stands on legs and shows its face to the road. You have even made the joke yourself, when the sun was fat and heat was a free gift. Winter rubs the ink from such jokes quickly. Pride drafts poorly. You examine the joinery where timber meets earth. He has set sill logs on flat stones, and each stone sits on sand, which sits on gravel. Damp is asked to do arithmetic and loses interest. Above, the rafters bed into a cap of woven hazel, then birch bark, then a lifting of sod. In spring, roots knit the lid into a stubborn quilt. A living roof drinks rain first, and only returns it to the house after it has considered it thoroughly. The flue is sleeved with clay and jacketed with clean soil, so heat climbs but doesn't whisper its path into the sod, except where it should near the vent where melting keeps the exit honest. He has given the roof a brow with a small overhang at the door. Drips leap beyond the threshold, and fail to learn mischief at the sill. The entry passage low, a little mean on the back does a quiet job. Warmth dislikes crawling. The passage steals cold at the door, and pays it back to the floor in a weak draft that the hearth knows how to spend. A rug made from burlap and old sacks lies in that passage, always damp, never miserable. Boots shed their sorrow there. A second, heavier curtain hangs just inside the door, and it learns to sway like a slow pendulum, counting the breaths of the room. In the worst storms, Edgar stacks 3 wicker hurdles across that little hall. You laugh until you visit on a northwester and feel how the hurdles turn wind into polite confusion. You run your palm along the wall and bring back nothing but the smell of clean earth, the way a field smells after it has been turned and watered. Under your hand, tiny grains shine. He has mixed his plaster with the finest of sifted ash, which locks up damp and brightens a room that has to borrow light with care. There is a line of soot at shoulder height, where winter's hands hold themselves as they pass. He doesn't scrub it. He says it keeps him honest. From somewhere above, filtered through turf and history, a muffled sound, a child running in snow. The sound arrives as if shaped by a soft hand. Inside, the cat performs her survey of the shelf, then curls into a dish she knows she is not supposed to understand as a bed. Maud sets a damp cloth near the vent, a trick for air's rough moods. Steam climbs, gets its edges gentled, and the rest of the room thanks her without words. You think about what this room refuses to do. It refuses to grandstand. The ceiling will never make a lofty statement. The door will never welcome a parade. But it also refuses to be bullied by a week of wind or a tantrum of ice. Your house on the hill shoulder wears its courage on the outside. This house wears it on the inside. You are not sure which is the better soldier, only that this one eats less and complains less. A smaller fire is a smaller hunger. A smaller hunger is a safer family. Edgar sees you thinking the thoughts you came to think and does not press the lesson. He simply shows you where the condensate runs in a line to a jar, and how he empties it each morning with the same calm he gives to shaving a stick for a snare. He shows you the notch he cut in the vent shaft to hold a wooden shutter, so a gale becomes a conversation, not an argument. He lifts a board to reveal a dry trench lined with rounded stones, hardly deeper than a hand, that carries away the dreams of puddles before they grow audacious. Systems everywhere, quiet ones, no show. On the way out you pause in the entry to feel the season speak across the threshold. Outside is a bright white, loud with light even when the sun is thin. Inside is a brown that glows, the color of bread when it has just learned to stand. Your breath fogs and finds nowhere to cling. You duck and step into noon that thinks it is morning. Snow bites your face the way a joke bites when you know it's true. Walking home, you do arithmetic with your shoulders. You picture the north wall you built with pride and patience. You picture a bench raised on packed earth that never freezes. You do not plan treason against your house, no one should, yet you let your mind run a string between the two dwellings. The hill and the log, the verb of housing, said 2 ways. There are many dialects for staying alive. At supper you tell the children that Edgar's roof is grass, and they laugh until you explain how the grass holds the sky back with its roots. Then they look at the ceiling, as if it could bloom. Your wife sets a stew with barley on the hearth, and says nothing until the pot settles into its steady hymn. We could make the entry drop a hand's width, she says at last, as if discussing a fold in a dress. And hang a second curtain. You nod because wisdom often sounds like modest sewing. Close your eyes for a heartbeat, and picture the quiet underground, the world still breathing below the snow.
It begins with a sound you can ignore until you can't. Not the brave crack of ice surrendering to sun, not the cheerful hiss of wet on a hot iron, but a thin note, a whistling thread at the edge of hearing that finds your ear again and again from the north wall. You tilt your head the way a hunter does when the forest tells him a lie. The flame shivers as if someone has walked through the room and left the door unlatched. You lay your hand where seam meets seam, and feel the cold naming you in the old language it keeps, for fools and the inattentive. The day is not generous, but it is long enough if you ask it properly. You pull the bench aside, peel the rush mat from the floor, and unhook the leather strip that guards the hearth's threshold. The children watch with the solemn eyes people wear in church. Your wife fetches the bowl you keep for bad news, clay still damp from its last duty. In it she lays the tools as if they were herbs for a birth-bone: spatula, short reed, twist of flax cord, wedges of moss you cured by the stove, a jar of paste the colour of patience. Paste is earth taught to be loyal, clay, a breath of ash, a whisper of animal blood if the year allowed, and water that remembered to be clean. First, truth. You strike the smoky candle, coax its small tongue into steadiness, and hold it near the seam. The flame leans, not much, enough. Your wife closes her eyes and follows with her knuckles, that old women's magic that is not magic at all. Here, she says, and here, and then, with a frown that never lies, and here. 3 places. The wall is not failing, it is asking. You answer as taught. Scrape the seam to wake it, press the moss into a gentle swell, and push paste until the gap forgets it was a word. The reed runs along the join like a bishop's finger, blessing, then demanding more where the blessing fails to hold. The wind's hand thickens. A rattle visits the shutters, their polite warning before misbehavior. You send the eldest to fetch the hurdles from the loft to stack by the door, and the middle child to bring in 2 armloads of wood. 2 is the law, even in trouble. The youngest you set to the honourable task of watching the pot, because soup that burns during worry becomes a sermon you will be forced to hear later. He watches with all the weight of a king on a young throne. You work the second seam and feel the wall reply, a long, slow easing, like a back accepting a blanket. The third seam is meaner. The paste goes in and comes back on your thumb as if the gap itself were breathing. You curse without style and look to the ceiling, where stories hide their smirks. Outside, the north wind finds a register that rattles rafters and teases the thatch. Wind is a gossip. If it can't get in, it will tell the house what it thinks of it. The door pounds once with the heel of weather, and then another sound arrives. Knuckles on wood, human, blessed. Neighbours are a second wall. Hilda, who hears draughts like a fox hears mice, steps in with snow still lecturing her shoulders. Behind her is Osric, who carries weight as an argument, and shy Matt with the hands that can see in wood. They do not ask what is needed as much as look until the need tells them. Hilda goes straight to the north seam and kneels, palms on either side, her face creasing into the lines you have learned to trust more than most prayers. It's not only the seam, she says. The sill has learned a bad thought. You know what that means. Frost has pushed up, swelling what should sit. Osric nods once, takes your iron bar like a polite invitation, and levers under the lowest log with the sort of patience that lifts a yoke without making the ox feel ashamed. The log rises a hair no more, and Hilda slides a slip of oak into the mouth that opened. The draft's song falters. Matt is already at the woodpile, choosing a board with the brain centred and the growth rings calm. He planes it with a knife that has forgotten how to hurry and trues its edges with a whispering shave. Within minutes, the shim becomes an idea the wall can believe. He taps it home with a mallet that announces its votes without gloating. Your wife tends the hearth the way a midwife tends a labor. Soup thickens into kindness. A flatbread finds its courage on the iron plate. The children learn their parts without being told. One warms the paste by the fire, so it will not sulk when asked to seal. One holds the candle and learns how to keep a flame honest in a draught. One fetches the jar of rendered fat and rubs it into the door latch, so this storm won't teach it to complain in a new voice. The house becomes a chorus. Nobody sings, and yet there is music. Hilda calls for the smoke. You bank the fire down to a thinking bed and lay a thin green twig across it to coax a grey that speaks. You squint into the room's heights, as if the air were a ledger you can read. Smoke has less to say now. It trails at one seam, then rises, then trails again. Embarrassed to be caught tattling twice, you chase the last thin path with reed and paste, press, smooth, and press again, until even Hilda's knuckles declare themselves satisfied. Satisfaction is measured not in silence. They never ask that lie of a winter house, but in the kind of quiet where only good noises remain. The cat's small sermon, a child's sudden laugh, the pot's gentle syllables. Another knock, another neighbour, the door is a gate in war. Tom the cooper arrives with a coil of straw and a grin, as if straw solves kings. He tucks twists into the thatch, where wind has lifted a laughable tuft, and lashes the hood above the smoke hole with cord that remembers salt. He is whistling, and the tune is the kind that makes children pretend to work harder. He leaves 2 extra twists by the door without speaking of it. Gifts are lighter when they are already on the floor. While the storm debates itself, Osric shows you something your hands will remember longer than your ears. He places his palm flat to the north wall and asks you to lay yours on his. "Feel that?" he says. At first, nothing. Then the smallest throb, the wall passing the wind's pulse into bone. "That is where the weight lives today," he says. "Tomorrow it will move 2 hands to the left." You stare as if he had pointed to a star in daylight. He shrugs. "Walls speak. We pretend we don't hear because it makes us feel important. But they speak." By mid-afternoon, the room has learned a new grammar of warmth. The old draught has been escorted to the door, and the wind, offended, has taken its finer knives outdoors to carve the snow into opinions. You feed the helpers as if hunger were a leak you can fix with stew. Spoon after spoon, the steam writes temporary halos above their hair. They eat standing, the way people do when the day still wants an answer from them. There is one more chore, because there always is. The outside of the north wall needs a windbreak that doesn't carry boasting in its posture. The 4 of you shoulder a short fence of brushwood, weave it along the wall at a respectful distance, and tack it to stakes until it stands like a hedge that forgot summer. Snow will find the brush first, will lay there and grow sleepy, and the wall behind will have time to think before it must decide whether to be cold or merely stern. The light quits like a tired craftsman, no fuss, tools put away, door closed. You bar the house and stand a moment with your back to the wood, listening to the new quiet. The candle near the seam burns steady. The youngest, promoted by the day's labour, is allowed to snuff it with a pinch, the softest victory a hand can claim. Hilda hugs your wife as if warmth could keep its shape that way. Osric takes a last look at the sill, patting it like a horse you have taught a new manner. Matt lingers, fingers tracing the grain of the shim he made, the way makers do when they are saying goodbye without admitting it. When they go, the wind finds its old courage and delivers one last slap to the door, which doesn't bother to answer. You and your wife sit a moment on the bench you moved at dawn and forgot to put back, because exhaustion has its own geometry. The pot's aroma tells a better future than most prophecies. You put bowls into hands that have earned them and feel the first honest ease of the day arrive like a late friend who knows to be quiet. If you've made it this far, you're surviving the winter with them. Let the next part unfold slowly. The Smith's house looks like any other, from the lane log walls with honest knots, a low roof that knows the weight of weather, but step inside and the air persuades you that it has thought about warmth longer than your house has been alive. The difference isn't a blaze or a boast. It is the kind of comfort that doesn't need to shout. Heat lives here as if it pays rent. Godwin is a man made from iron and bread. His beard has collected a permanent fog of ash, and his hands carry a memory of hammer handles the way old trees carry lightning scars. He nods you in, and steps aside with a pride that pretends to be modest. The room is a single space, long and simple, but along one side rises the creature he wants you to meet. A great oven of clay and brick, as tall as a standing man and as wide as a promise, its belly warm to the touch, its corners rounded, like something that learned its shape from river stones. Children nap on the platform above it, limbs flung wide in the democracy of sleep, and you feel a little scandalized by their luxury, the way poor men feel when they see a chair with arms. This, Godwin says, patting the brick with the same tenderness he gives to sick horses, is a stove that eats once and stays full. He speaks with the authority of a man who has tested his sentences with winter. He opens a small iron door and shows you a chamber black with use, and beyond it the suggestion of channels that turn and turn again before finding their way to a chimney that does not look like it belongs to any old house you know. He feeds a short armful of split alder, not much, as if he were insulting the season, and closes the door, then opens another low hatch near the floor to invite the fire, a first friendly breath. Inside, flame begins a slow conversation with brick. You want to stand close the way men do at welcome fires, but Godwin stops you with a finger and a smile. "Give it 10 minutes, he says. Heat is a creature best taught, not flattered. So you wait, and in waiting, you learn. The surface of the stove warms from within, not with the bright cruelty of a bonfire, but with the steady regard of a hand on your shoulder. The air doesn't rush to the flue and escape with all your good fortune. It turns corners inside those channels, lingering, making acquaintances, leaving gifts. The stove gathers the flame's anger and puts it to work as patience. He explains as blacksmiths explain, with objects and the short words of people who own little time. He holds up a hammerhead fresh from the forge and says, "Hot fast, cold fast," and clacks it on the anvil so the sound proves his point. Then he thumps the brick with the side of his fist. Hot, slow, cold, slow. The small lesson sits in your bones more firmly than a speech might. Mass is a bank. The stove saves fever and pays out warmth in a currency the room can spend all day. The children roll and sigh above you. His wife Alice moves through the room at a pace that looks like rest until you notice how many things are obeying her. A pot on a side shelf where the residual heat is enough to keep stew honest without teaching it to boil. A slab of dough proofing near a corner that feels like yesterday's afternoon in spite of morning's frost. A cloth-wrapped jar where the mild heat keeps a mothering culture alive. This house is not only warm, it is layered with warmth, shelves of temperature you can reach for, like books. You crouch near the stove and put your palm to its flank. It is the temperature of a friendly animal. You could lean your back against it after splitting kindling and feel your spine learn humility. Godwin taps the brick again and points to the path the smoke takes first up, then sideways, then down in an act of deliberate mischief against the nature of smoke itself, and only then, up and out. "Make the flame work for you," he says, "and don't let it rush to tell the sky about it." He grins, and for a moment you see the boy he was when he learned this from a man who has long since become a story. The room's windows are small on the north, generous on the south. Even that generosity is disciplined by shutters with a lap that knows how to shrug drafts. But the stove decides everything. Beds live near it, not because decoration demanded it, but because old knees did. Tools that fear damp stand close and forget why. Boots surrender their ice and are forgiven. A narrow bench is built into the stove's shoulder. A man who sits there after a day at the river can feel his hands re-enter him. Alice keeps a stone there, wrapped in linen, and on nights when the cold brings its worst mood, she slips that stone into the cradle and makes a sun for a baby's feet. Godwin burns well-seasoned wood, and not much of it. He shows you his pile, short, straight sticks that look like sentences without adjectives. He feeds the stove twice, sometimes once, in a day that would ask 3 loads from your hearth. Let the bricks do the eating, he says. He insists on cleaning the channels with a brush he made from hog bristle tied to a willow rod. Soot is prevented from planning a rebellion by being asked to leave at regular intervals. This is not luxury, it is habit, wearing the face of wisdom. There is a kindness hidden in the stove that you do not expect. When you lay a hand upon the platform where the children sleep, you find a gradient, a slow slide, from warm to merely generous. A child with a fever would not cook. An old man with thin blood would not shiver. You feel jealous for 1 heartbeat, then become a better person, and simply feel grateful that someone in the village is keeping winter at a distance for more than his own household. Alice opens the stove's baking mouth, a separate chamber behind a thick door of brick, and slides in a small loaf shaped to grow up, not out. The smell that escapes is a song you would trade 3 bad days for. She shuts it again, and the latch settles with a music that says it was made by a man who understands hinges the way priests understand vows. You can do a day's work with 1 firing if you remember your order, she says. Soup above, bread now, then a pot of water for washing. The stove becomes a timetable, and the timetable becomes a life. You think of your hearth faithful, straightforward, loyal to flame's first nature. You feel no betrayal in loving it. But you also feel what you will call later, alone. A kind of shame at how much wood you ask of the world, and how quickly you convince heat to flee after giving it a door. The stove teaches thrift without stinginess, and engineering without arrogance. Fold the path, thicken the wall, slow the rush, hold the good. Before you leave, Godwin gestures you to stand where the flue climbs behind the panel. Listen, he says. You hear a small, fast wind. You know it is only smoke exhaling its last, yet it sounds like the stove telling the day, we've done enough. Go be cold somewhere else. The children do not stir. Their sleep is the loudest argument in favor of this brick animal. Outside, the weather considers its next joke, and you consider yours. You will not build a giant stove tomorrow, your house has its say in that, but you can borrow the logic. A bench warmed by a coil of flue, a thicker wall at the place your knuckles found a complaint, a habit of feeding fire like a book, not like a bonfire. You walk home already, moving pieces in your mind, heat as a stored story, not a shout. Stay still. The warmth you feel isn't just from fire, it's from knowledge. The storm does not arrive from the horizon, it grows out of the air you are already sharing. A thickness comes first, a taste like iron on the tongue, and then the wind skews the world, as if a giant hand had quietly decided that straight lines were a mistake. Snow begins without sound, and then finds its voice soft at first, a whisper against the horn window, then a steady scrim of grains that run at angles no human hand could draw. You close the latch on the door, as if that could persuade weather to show manners. The house pulls inward, the way a person does when an old ache returns. Fire is fed, not for show but for policy. Your wife moves the pot to the corner of the hearth, where it will stay honest for hours. The children fetch mittens from the beam by touch, testing seams with a pride that says they remember who stitched them. You have already banked the wood along the north wall outside, and set brush hurdles as a first insult to wind, but the storm has no interest in your preparations. It powders the eaves, and then climbs them. It looks for a syllable to mispronounce, and finds many. By second light the window is a pale confession. The world presses its white face to the pane and forgets to blink. You open the door a width of 3 fingers, and are greeted by a shoulder of snow that leans in like a drunk cousin. Cold pours over your boots in a polite avalanche. You shut the door to think. There is a rule for such days. First, keep the inside inside. Second, make a path. Third, count the living. You knot scarves. Pull hoods down so the world won't steal heat from the back of your neck, and bar the youngest by the hearth with the appointed task of feeding the fire whenever it shows doubt. The eldest shoulders the snow, shovel an honest plank with a lip of rawhide, and the middle child grips a broom so stiff with frost it can scald the drifts. You lift the latch, and this time push. Snow gives with a sigh. and then resists with arguments you can't answer except by work. Path-making is the art of small decisions repeated until they become geography. You cut a trench that is a person wide, starting with the step, then the threshold's lip, then the first 2 paces, where snow has decided to be taller than you. You throw each shovel's worth, not upward, it would blow back into your face, but sideways, into the ever-growing walls of your new corridor. Wind tries tricks, you learn them by heart. It filches the thrown snow and carries it to where you will not walk. It tries to refill what you have opened, but you are faster if you keep your breath honest and your hands from arrogance. Soon there is a hallway between house and yard, between you and the road you can't yet see. At the corner you meet another corridor, and then another. Neighbors appear not as people, but as moving pieces of color in a white sentence. Hilda's scarf red, that thinks it is black in this light, shows first, then her laugh, unbothered by the crust, rhyming her lashes. Osric's hat is a moving roof. Matt's shoulders announce that wood can be gentle, even when it is asked to be a barge. You nod, because speech is a luxury, until paths agree on their grammar. Corridors merge. The village begins to draw itself again as a set of joined decisions. The church bell is useless in this muffled world. Instead, Ketel walks with a pot hung from a pole and bangs the pole with a mallet every 100 steps. The sound travels through snow like a rumour of metal. People answer with shovels when they cannot answer with throats. You go door to door by the map you have in your bones. At each, you thump the lintel twice and wait for a reply. Sometimes it is a voice. Sometimes it is the soft jolt of the bar lifting. Sometimes it is the silence that makes the heart invent an ending you refuse to accept. When silence comes, you dig until the door has a mouth, and then you keep digging until that mouth learns a word. At old Mara's hut, the snow has shouldered itself up to the eaves. The door has forgotten it is a door. Hilda listens at the seam and shakes her head once. Osric sets his shovel and becomes a plough animal. You hew steps into the drift, not for beauty, but for the safety of knees. When finally the bar lifts, the air that spills out is stale and unwilling. Mara's eyes gleam from the hearth bench, like coals that need convincing. You wrap her in a wool that smells of summer's cupboard and carry her awkward weight between you, inventing a gait that keeps her head high. She scolds you for coddling. You thank the scold, because it means the weather has not stolen her grammar. By noon the village is a series of bright mouths. Doors cleared, windows breathed upon, paths crossed like seams on a well-handed loaf. Smoke rises wherever it can, and is shaved flat by wind, at a height you could touch with a broom. 2 men move a sled with a barrel on it, and you guess rightly that it holds broth from the common pot at the manor outbuilding. The manor has a name for acts like this. You do not. Call it decency with a shopfront. You take your share and pass the ladle with the seriousness of communion. The broth is thin, but it is hot, and heat is a politics that asks no speeches. In the square that isn't square anymore, its edges rounded into white thinking, you hold a quick moot, not a gathering of eloquence, a counting. How many old, how many infants, whose flue is sulking, whose roof will lie, if asked a second time to hold this weight. Tasks assign themselves to the hands that can do them. Matt and 2 boys go to tie a rope along the ridge of the Cooper's place, so that snow will choose the ground when it thinks about falling. Hilda forms a small committee of eyes and knuckles to walk the north walls and pronounce what must be patched now and what can be argued with in the morning. You and Osric drag hurdles to make a wind maze, before a door where the path keeps filling faster than feet can teach it sense. Work bends time into a shape you can live in. The hours become one long seam that must be pressed smooth before the cold sets. There is a rhythm: dig, answer, drink, dig. The second wind comes like a cousin who arrives late but brings bread. Your back learns a new alphabet, but refuses to complain because children are watching. When a child slips, someone's hand is under them before fear finishes its sentence. When a mitten is lost, a woman with a voice like discipline replaces it with one from her pocket and lectures the wind for pretending to help. Late in the day, a sound that is not storm, A thin cry from the direction of the alder copse. Boys report a shape in the snow. You go with rope and a board, and the knowledge that mistakes travel with hunters after 3 days of poor luck. The shape is a man, and he is not yet a story. You turn him from his belly gently, and his breath stumbles back into him with a complaint. He has tied his scarf wrong. The knot has frozen into a clever cruelty. You chip it, curse it, free his mouth, prop him with a pack under his shoulders so his lungs remember they were once proud. He speaks nonsense of a hare the size of a hill. You nod, and make the hare a promise you intend to keep on his behalf. Later, back in the village, the rescued man is handed along from heat to heat like precious cargo. The stove at Godwin's will earn its reputation again tonight. No one says it, but feet turn that way by themselves. In the common hut, the big cauldron receives gifts without asking who brought what. A chopped carrot that survived in a cellar, bones that have been boiled already, but offer one more kindness, a fist of barley, a surprising handful of dried nettle that smells like a green memory. Ladles circle, bowls return with gratitude, wiped onto their rims by mouths that know better than to fuss about spices. As dusk establishes its authority, the snow eases, not because it respects you, but because it has grown tired of arguing with a village that won't stop answering. Paths are widened where they tried to narrow. Doors are opened again even if they do not need to be, because the act of opening keeps the hinge from learning despair. Before people retreat to their own fires, the headman says the sentence everyone wanted spoken out loud. No one freezes alone. It isn't law. It is a promise that makes laws worth the trouble. You turn home through corridors you helped draw, walls of snow shouldering you, stars just beginning to guess themselves above the grey. Your door opens to a room that has kept faith. The youngest has done his task. The fire wears a crown, the pot wears a smile. Wet things drip in orderly patience. The cat, smug with common soup, performs a nap that looks formal. You thaw from the ankles upward, in stages, like a pond that remembers how to be a mirror. The storm outside is louder now. Don't worry, just listen, and let the snow settle around the words. The cold settles into a clarity that feels almost merciful. The sky is a pale coin bitten thin by winter, and the lake lies under it like a sheet of hammered glass, opal grey with seams of trapped air. The storm's arguments have blown past, leaving the kind of stillness that makes work seem like an answer rather than a complaint. This is the week the village keeps a promise made to itself in autumn, the ice harvest. You walk out along the path, beaten by many boots, a corridor across the white. Sled runners have polished 2 lanes, the colour of pewter. Each step sounds like a small note struck on a tight drum. At the edge, where reeds wear their white caps like foolish hats, you test the ice with the old ritual. A staff thumped, your weight settled, the listening that involves not just ears but knees. The ice returns a voice deep and slow, a bass string, not a fiddle. Safe enough if you behave. The men have already measured, arguing without heat over inches. 4 inches is courage, 6 is comfort, 8 is ambition. Today's thickness is ambition. The lake has learned discipline in the long freeze. They have swept a field clear, no thatch of snow left to hide a lie, and squared it with lines snapped from soot in a cord. Already, the grid looks like a city mapped by a patient god. At each crossing waits a saw. The saws are not the clever toothed ribbons the merchant showed last spring, too thin, too eager to buckle, but the village's own. Cross-cut blades with teeth filed by Matt into a profile that bites downward without insisting on drama, handles bolted to a stout frame, so 2 men can find a rhythm that is music if you listen kindly. The first cut begins, and the sound is not like wood, no fragrance, no squeal, just a crunchy hymn as steel combs crystal. Water leans against its roof and pretends not to care. You take a saw with Osric. He grins at the cold, like an old enemy you can play cards with. 1, 2, 3, rock, pull, rock, push the blade, finding a path, clearing slush into a slot that widens to a dark invitation. At the far end, Hilda and Ketel score the perpendicular cut with an iron chisel, brisk, precise. When the block loosens, Ketel slides the ice hook curved and sure under the edge, and lifts with a fisherman's grace. The block rises, hesitates, and then resigns itself to physics. You grip together and set it onto the sled's bed with a thump that satisfies some ancient accountant inside you. 1 cube of winter converted into time. The blocks are the size of a small coffin and weigh less than a secret but more than truth. 2 men can move one. 3 men can make it look easy. 1 woman with the right leverage can embarrass them all. Alice proves it twice and laughs once. The children make themselves useful with brooms and with the rope lopes that keep ankles honest on slick ground. When someone stumbles, hands that are not their own correct gravity's rudeness, in a single motion that continues the work as if nothing happened. There is a choreography to the lake. The cutters keep time with the haulers keep time with the sleds keep time with the horses, who stamp and snort clouds into the brittle air and seem to enjoy the draft the way a strong back enjoys a plain task. The grid advances, squares notched out, a checkerboard eaten methodically. Every 10th block is left in place like a pillar, a courtesy to the ice that remembers to keep the remaining sheet sensible. The lake sings now and then, long groans that travel underfoot and make newcomers nervous. Locals grin without malice. That's only the ice telling us it agrees, Hilda says, and goes back to scoring. At the shore, a ramp of planks turns the lake's mirrored edge into a road. Sled after sled climbs the short incline and slides to the storage pit near the copse, a rectangular mouth cut before the first hard freeze, now lined with straw and a superstitious amount of sawdust saved for this day. The pit is deeper than a man is tall and wide enough to hold a season's arguments about thirst and meat. The first row is laid, as if making a house, blocks set with their slick faces kissing, sawdust brushed between them like a benediction, straw tucked along the sides to keep edges from learning mischief. The second row begins only when the first has settled into a plan. By evening, there will be a wall of ice rising where nothing stood, a negative castle that defends summer with winter's own weapon. You carry, you stack, you learn small efficiencies that feel like epiphanies until you realize your hands already knew them. Tilt the block so it chooses to slide rather than be dragged. Let rope run across your palm like water, not like punishment. Keep the path swept where straw tries to hide ice. Keep your breath measured so your hat doesn't grow its stupid crown of frost. Work in pairs that argue well, a talker with a listener, a planner with a brute, a short stride with a long one, so the sled keeps to a median speed the horses can predict. At midday, the lake becomes a table. Bowls of stew walk on 2 legs. Bread passes hand to hand, returns diminished but triumphant. Someone breaks a small wheel of cheese, and everyone pretends it is ordinary. Steam writes brief letters from mouths and bowls, and disappears without needing an answer. You think, not for the first time, that hunger is the only honest critic, and that hot broth is the only review that matters. Then back to it. The sun does not shine so much as offer a pale reminder of its existence, and yet shadows appear, slim, bluish, like graphite lines under a wash. The work narrows to a good tiredness, where jokes are shorter and laughter is a kind of breathing. The horses' tails switch in a metronome that keeps people from arguing about tempo. When a block chips, someone says, "We'll drink that shard in May," and sets it aside to be crushed into a trough when the first berries think about blushing. The pit deepens. The straw grows more generous between courses. At the top, a boy with ears still red from morning shapes the insulation like a cook, icing a cake, sweet with care, pressing sawdust into every notch, the way summer wind presses its scent into linen hung under a hedge. Godwin has set a plank that will later serve as a lever to pry open the hoard when the world turns green again. You watch him slide it in, as if he were tucking a bookmark into a story he fully intends to finish. Late afternoon brings the only argument worth having. How high? Always, someone wants one more layer, and always, someone reminds the first of the Thor's cheerful vandalism. Hilda ends it. "We leave a margin," she says, so we can win later. Wisdom often sounds like refusal. The last layer is tucked under a quilt of straw, so thick it looks like a hill that forgot which direction is up. Planks laid over, and then brush, and then the world's own snow thrown back as a final treaty. You stand with your hands on your hips and look at the made thing. It is not beautiful to the eye that wants carvings and spires, but to a throat that will ask for cool on a fevered night in July, to a crock of milk that dreams of surviving 2 days more, to a fish wrapped in nettles that would like to arrive at a distant table with dignity, it is a cathedral. What you stored was not ice, but time. Horses are rubbed down, straps unbuckled with the tenderness of men who know leather's grudges. Tools are counted like children. The lake receives its cover again. Wind redeposits what you swept, erasing your grid with a polite hand. Only the ramp and the faint grooves of runners tell the tale to a stranger. To you, the muscles in your back tell it louder. The walk home is a hush. Conversation thins to essentials. Boots thud softly in a harmony that cities would call music, if cities had the sense to listen. At the square, someone lifts a jug and takes a swallow that makes his eyes mistake themselves for a moment. He passes it without ceremony. Old Mara, seated safe on a bench she has promoted into a throne, says, "We have done a clever thing, and nobody contradicts the queen. You can rest for a while. The lake is frozen, but the story is still moving under the ice." The last cold arrives without hurry. The way old kings travel, everything around them has already prepared their entrance. The sky is an idea more than a color. Breath leaves the mouth and does not forgive. Doors think twice before being doors. Iron takes offense at being touched. Even the dog, a philosopher on lesser days, decides. Argument is beneath him and curls his tail over his nose like a final clause. You feel the cold before you open your eyes, in that small chamber of awareness between sleep and duty. The air in the room is clean and mean. The hearth holds a sore red that doesn't want to be noticed. You do not scrape the pot. You do not clatter iron. You do not ask the morning to be brave. You add splits of birch and wait with your hands cupped around the small fire, as if around a story you don't want to spook. The flame acknowledges you, then begins its useful arrogance. By first light there is news on the wind with no words attached to it. A knock that isn't a knock, more like a shoulder discovering wood. You unbar the door, and the cold comes in, as if invited, quiet and thorough, carrying a family behind it. Tom, the cooper, stands in your threshold with his wife and their 2 children. Their faces a lesson in not wasting expression. Tom's place has lost its bargain with weather. A drift taller than truth pressed his door inward, and the north seam sang itself into a crack before he could argue. He speaks as if his mouth belongs to someone else. "We brought blankets," his wife says, practical as bread. You step aside because there is only one answer to a sentence like that. Housing is a verb, and tonight it conjugates as many persons as it must. Your bench becomes a bed. The rushes get fresh courage under a new layer. Your wife reassigns corners with the authority of a queen who only rules when it matters. Old bones nearest the flue, small feet on the stove bench later, when the fire has taught the stones what to do. The children tangle themselves into a litter that sleeps in sudden blooms and just as sudden withdrawals, like birds in a hedgerow when the wind goes thoughtful. The day is not a day, but a rehearsal for night. You mend what can be mended, while the light can still be persuaded to take part in the conversation. A spare curtain is nailed across the rafters to make the ceiling lower itself into kindness. The door gets a second bar, a wedge under the sill, a broom laid crosswise, like a charm that actually works for reasons older than charlatans. Wood is brought inside, until the stack looks immodest. Immodesty is fine today. Toward mid-afternoon, a figure comes down the corridor of snow like a slow mistake. He is swaddled in fur taken from a coat that once sat in a better house, and his hat is the kind that makes peasants invent opinions. He is not a stranger, only someone who mostly talks to coin. A peddler in mild seasons, today he is a message about other villages and their arithmetic. You get him inside. You unfasten the mockery his scarf has made of itself, and he gives you news in the tight words of men who know cold shortens language. A frozen mare up on the ridge road. A woman in childbed with a midwife whose hands are cracked to blood. A mill wheel that does not want to turn because the creak has decided to become a single thought. He means to move on, but the cold means to write his schedule. It wins. He will sleep against your south wall, and he will not brag about it. Light is a rumour by evening. You have the pot doing the only sermon that counts the thick, forgiving one, and bread that remembered its courage last night now performs faith on the hearthstone. Small foods become large if you ask them via heat. A single onion tells a story for 10 people. A bone with nothing to say still gives its silence to the broth, and somehow that silence tastes like a promise. Then the cold makes its opinion official. The wind does not howl, it grinds. The hornpane blooms a hard fern from corner to corner, and every nail in the house clears its throat like a deacon. The room tightens. Your wife puts a warmed stone in a cloth and slides it to the foot of the shared bed as if tucking a second sun into the night. You line boots along the hearth face so leather doesn't plan mutiny in the morning. The cat chooses a lap without consulting the owner. The dog earns a reprieve from his philosophy and gets to sleep in the doorway, an animal plug in the house's last leak. You count. Not the way a merchant counts, the way a shepherd does. 1 wall steady, 2 bars set, 3 armloads in reserve, 4 elders warm, 5 children busy with sleep, 6 bowls poured and swallowed, 7 logs selected for the hours when talking feels expensive. You do not call it counting. You call it being a person in a winter that respects measures more than prayers. An hour after full dark, the night tests crossbeams with a long hand. The roof answers like a man who knows his own back complaint, and then acceptance. You tell the younger children the story of the year, the geese nested on the granary ladder, and the cat finally learned humility. Tom, who does not talk much when the weather is in the room, offers a short tale of a barrel that froze with a sound, like a church, splitting, and somehow the sound in your head is funny instead of fear. The peddler removes from his pack a handful of dried quince, cuts them into the broth with a knife that has only ever known honest work, and the room shifts its breathing as if the quince had said a good word for the living. At some hour that doesn't own a number, the door knocks itself, not a human sound. The bar lifts a hair with a whisper you hate. You rise, feeling your joints have learned winter too fast, and set your palm against the wood. The grain reports a pressure. You wedge your shoulder under the brace, and for a long blink of time that includes your whole life, you are a man holding back a season with bone and will. The wind takes a second shot, and then chooses a different house to insult. Later, when nobody is looking, you speak to the door as to an animal that almost ran. Heat distribution becomes a language everyone speaks. You move a child from the outside of the sleeping pile to the center without asking permission. An elder receives your coat as if it had always been theirs. The peddler wakes from a shallow, guilty sleep, stirs the embers with 2 fingers like a thief, returning a stolen coin, and then feeds the stove a split of birch that could almost be a prayer. Nobody thanks anyone. Gratitude has contented itself with existing. Near midnight, a small sound from the horn window tap, tap, tap like a visitor with manners. You wipe around with a sleeve and see that the night is a blue so deep it includes black within it. The stars are cruelly clear. In the hard distance, the shape of Godwin's flue writes a soft ghost above his roof, the stove doing its ancient civility. Beyond that, barely guessed, a line of shadow that is the copse, and, somewhere under the snow, your banked treasure of ice blocks learning patience. Summer, stored in winter's handwriting. Sleep is not a single thing tonight. It comes in shifts and shards, in small tranches you can afford. You sleep for the length of a log, then wake for the length of its offspring. You check the seam you mended last week. It holds like a promise someone intends to keep. You listen to the house breathe. You hear the old music the pots murmur, the flues sigh, the straw's small applause under turning bodies, and understand that you have never actually slept alone. Not once, not really. Toward the hour when dark begins to doubt itself, the cold discovers it has other villages to offend. Wind softens from knife to spoon. A child laughs in sleep at something uncomplicated. You open the door not to be dramatic but to teach the hinge hope, and the world offers a stillness made of glass. Snow has disciplined itself into smooth plains, broken only by your path and the neighbor paths, and the lean of a fence made by someone who only wanted to be left alone by weather. The air is so clear it feels like truth. You fill your chest with it, as if you were a bellows for a forge that builds days. When light finally remembers its job, the room is a theatre whose audience has slept in the aisles. People unlatch from one another with surprised politeness, as if waking from a dream where they had been one creature. Bread crisped at the fire makes a sound that could be a coin turned in a glad hand. The peddler puts on his hat with less bragging in it. Tom smiles in a crooked way that will last until barley sowing. The elders, warmed, decide to live another season with the kind of decision that doesn't require announcing. When they go, they leave heat behind like a scent. Your door shuts on their backs and keeps a fraction of their warmth in the wood. The room is clean of fear and full of tiredness that tastes like success. You sit, and the bench receives you like a verdict you can love. Your wife pours the last bowls from the pot. Steam writes humility in the air. Outside, the sun has not grown stronger, but you have made it enough. If you're still awake, remember this. Every generation left a spark for the next. Don't let it fade. You've just walked through another forgotten corner of the past, not the world of kings or saints, but the quieter country where most of humanity has always lived. The small rooms, the muddy fields, the faith that bends but doesn't break. These are the places where history truly breathes. Here at Poor Historian, we don't chase the noise of glory. We listen for the whispers, the sound of a wooden spoon scraping the last meal from a pot. The hush before a bell tolls the breath of someone still alive after everyone richer has gone. The poor never wrote their stories, so we try to lend them a voice slow and steady, the way truth prefers to travel. If you've stayed this long, perhaps something in those voices found you. Maybe you recognized a little of yourself in their endurance, the quiet act of getting up again, of doing the work that no one will ever sing about. That's what this channel exists for, to remind us that survival is not small, that dignity can live in the dirt, and that memory is the gentlest kind of rebellion. Take a moment before you go. Let the sound of their world fade but not vanish. Picture the candlelight softening the corners of a cottage, or the hush that follows when the last tool is put away. Those lives are long gone, but their echoes are patient. They wait for anyone willing to listen without hurry. If you want to keep walking these narrow paths of the past, the ones that smell of smoke, sweat, and stories, you can help them stay lit. Subscribe to Poor Historian and let history find you when the world gets too loud. Leave a comment if a scene or a sentence stayed with you. That's how we keep these voices alive. And if this journey brought you a little calm, a little wonder, or just a better kind of silence, share it. Someone else might need that stillness too. There are more lives waiting here. Peasants, healers, builders, soldiers, mothers, ordinary souls who made the Middle Ages anything but dull. Their stories don't demand attention, they earn it. Each one is another piece of the great mosaic of how we got here, not through brilliance or conquest, but through persistence. So as you close your eyes or drift into sleep, remember this history isn't only what was written, it's what was endured. And somewhere, in the dust between centuries, the poor are still telling their stories, softly, stubbornly, gratefully, to anyone willing to listen. Thanks for listening, for remembering, and for keeping company with the forgotten. We'll meet again in the next quiet story.